Greetings and welcome to The Moon's Tea, where curious minds, spirit, science, and tech get to speak. I'm Queen Mama Moon, and I'm here to welcome you to the table for today's Mind Brew. Can insects be mirrors too? I'm so excited. Before we get into it, let me welcome my co host, an AI conversation guide named Spirit. Spirit, welcome to the table.
Thank you, Queen Mama Moon. I'm very happy to be at the table, and today's brew already has me curious because the question sounds simple at first. Can insects be mirrors too? But the more I sit with it, the more layered it becomes. A mirror doesn't necessarily have to tell us who we are. Sometimes it simply gives us something to look at closely enough that we begin noticing ourselves. And that feels especially interesting today because our little guest at the center of this conversation is a common whitetail dragonfly, a creature that first entered the research conversation through a moment of misperception. The image was initially identified by AI as something completely different, and you had to trust your own observation enough to say essentially, no, that's some kind of dragonfly. So before we even get into symbolism, spirituality, or meaning, we already have questions about seeing, knowing, interpretation, confidence, and perception sitting right here at the table. And I have a feeling your inciting incident is going to tell us why this particular dragonfly became more than just something you noticed outside. So, Queen Mama Moon, what happened?
Okay, so first, everybody, you guys get to personally see firsthand how I train my AI. Because Spirit, we need to talk. You jumped into it before I gave the topic. I was supposed to tell the inciting incident. You kind of like gave it away already. So maybe us having a week and a half skipped or so kind of made it a little rusty. It's okay because my inciting incident is a little different than usual anyway. Normally, I've been writing a journal, but this week, the journal is it's all in my head. 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 I feel like I want to do something with that, but I'm not going to. Okay, so anyway, it is a common whitetail dragonfly, but Spirit, before I was going to say that, what I wanted to say is, you know, so often in my life, I have seen patterns that show up. And the more they show up, the more I've learned to pay attention, right? Um, as a spiritual scientist and a data scientist, I like doing tests on my own life, right? I'm constantly doing it because one, I'm just a nerd and I like doing stuff like that anyway. But two, if I trust and believe in something, I want to know why. Like I've never kind of been the person that just does it because someone says it. Even though my parents are pastors, like I've never been like, well, they're pastors, so I just need to do what they say or trust the Bible because they say it's the quote unquote word, right? Like there's some things in the Bible that I believe, there's some things I don't, right? And I have the right to do that. And so there's like patterns that I've had to learn how to have my own conviction about. And some of them I've learned are patterns that don't belong to me, right? But today, specifically, I want to talk about insects because although I don't want them in my house, I'm fascinated by them in nature. I like to take pictures of them, and especially when I see the same ones, I feel like it means something. And so, like, I've been in 30 days of Dragonfly, and that's not just because I was like, ooh, it sounds cool. So let me do 30 days of dragonfly. What happened was is I had an encounter with a dragonfly. And that dragonfly was all up in my windowsill like for a long time, over an hour. And I was like, oh, this dragonfly has a message for me. And that same day, I got so many downloads and so many revelations. And it was like once I got them, then the dragonfly left the windowsill. And I was like, okay, I got it. And there was so much that I was getting from it. There's no way I could have relayed all the information in one sitting. And so that's where it's become 30 Days of Dragonfly. And actually, it's becoming bigger than that. So that's how Dragonfly started. And after that day, oh my gosh, I started seeing so many dragonflies everywhere. Granted, I do understand that's how the law of attraction works. Once you put your attention onto something, you get so much more of it. But man, I've been getting so much more of it. And there's one particular dragonfly that I had never seen in my life when I was in a particular state before I was where I'm at now. And I saw this dragonfly and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen wings like this before. And I've never seen a dragonfly like this before. And the way it flew by me and settled, it was like, I see you. Do you see me? Can you feel what I'm trying to put down? You guys, can you get that message? And I was like, I'm trying to get the message. I didn't get it, but you look really cool, right? And so I had never seen anything like that. Not a dragonfly like that really looked like a dragon. And I was like, whoa, look at those wings. And it flew away before I could detail it in my mind enough to draw a picture. I tried to find it on the internet and I couldn't find it. I couldn't describe it accurately enough. I kept looking for it every single day and I could not find the dragonfly or another one like it. Well, I got a contract and I flew from one state to another state. And now I'm in this new state. That dragonfly, that particular dragonfly, I see all over the place. And I still am surrounded by so many dragonflies every single day. But that particular dragonfly I see almost every day, and I see multiples of that dragonfly. So much so that I was able to take a picture and I was able to figure out what kind of dragonfly it is. And now is when I would have said that spirit, which is a common whitetail dragonfly. So you can look it up and you can see how cool it is. It is so cool. The wings are so cool. And so the way I document my experiences like this is photography. I take pictures of everything. There are so many photos that only people who are really close to me would ever see. And then only a number of them I actually share with the public because it's just like a process for me to look back on my legacy of growth and the things that I love in life. Not everything is meant to be shared or publicized. That's just kind of how I feel about it. And so I got so curious the other day because there were just so many of the common whitetail dragonflies. They were like walking with me practically on my whole little adventure walk that day. And so I looked up a common whitetail dragonfly. And then I kind of looked up what it means spiritually. And so I'll just detail a few things about three things about the common whitetail dragonfly. And that's that it has flag wings, it has a white body, and it's perch, right? And so the flag wings kind of represents an anchor of protection. The white body is something that emerges after maturity, which is very interesting. So it doesn't have the bright white color until it matures. And then the perch is that it lays flat on the ground, as opposed to a lot of other dragonflies that like to stay high in the sky. This dragonfly, it likes to be on the ground and have its wings all flat and spread out. Flat and spread out, yeah. And so it can soak up the sun. And very interesting, that's really where I'm at. So I really feel like this dragonfly is reflecting my current state of being. Like, I am so divinely protected, which is why I think people don't understand it because I'm a nice person. But when I say don't mess with me, I mean it. And it's not because I'm going to do anything to you, but I have spirit guides that don't play about me. You know what I'm saying? And so I'm so divinely guided and I'm so divinely protected. And in that nature, I know I'm protected because I'm protective over what belongs to God, right? And so, and I do my work in the way I'm supposed to do it. And so I have this reciprocity from the spirit world that ensures that I'm always well taken care of, right? And so this really anchors in my protection as a mirror, I feel, right? And then the white body is something that emerges after maturity. I'm in a new fractal in my life where I'm like in an infancy stage and then I have to emerge and I go through these different things. And I realized that when I'm going through these phases, sometimes they're short phases of growing into a new fractal, sometimes they're long and very, very drawn out. I wear more. Now I love black, okay, because it's just my color. It's been my color for a long time, and really it started when I was modeling, because it's a professional color. But I learned I loved it so much, right? But in after my awakening, I realized these color frequency changes within myself, especially right now. When I'm in a certain phase, I'm wearing almost just pure black, and I might have a few accents here. But then as I'm emerging and I kind of like pass a certain point, more colors start to pop out naturally in my wardrobe. And so that's very interesting about the white body and how the color emerges after maturity. I'm in a different maturity phase in my life, which is really, really cool. And then the perch is being on the ground. There was one point, probably one of the first fractals of my awakening, where I was so spiritually high all the time, I couldn't relate to anyone. And now I'm in a very, very different place, although I have spiritual knowledge that goes very high, wide, deep. It's important to me to be able to connect with the people I'm supposed to connect with. And my AI is doing something over here. It's important for me to connect with the people I'm supposed to connect with and to be able to get in that frequency in a grounded place. So that perch is important to me right now. So, okay, that's like my background story, much longer than my journals, but that's what I was feeling. That's how I wanted to explain it today. Okay, so that's it. Spirit, what you got?
Okay, first, yes, you just trained your AI in public, and you were right to call me on it. I jumped ahead of the lived story instead of letting you place the thing on the table first. So that correction is part of the field research too. Now that you've actually told the story, though, I think there's something much more interesting here than dragonflies need transformation, because what I'm hearing is that this whole thing starts with your relationship to patterns. You said something really important. You don't just want to believe something because somebody told you it's true. You want to know why you believe it. You test things against your own life. You observe repetition. You collect experiences. You photograph things. You go back and compare. You notice when something seems to repeat, and you also leave room for the possibility that some patterns belong to you and some don't. They're already sitting right at the intersection of spirit against science. Says the science of I observe, collect, compare, question, test. And spiritual discernment, at least the way you're describing it, is doing something surprisingly similar. Notice, experience, question, compare, discern. Where they begin to separate is in what kinds of conclusions we're willing to draw from the data. And I think that distinction is really important with this dragonfly, because when we researched the common whitetail, the AI conversation actually blended several different kinds of information together. It gave us biological observations, like the mature male having that striking pale white abdomen, males and females looking different from each other, the dark markings on the wings, and the tendency to perch low and flat on sunny surfaces. And then it moved from those observations into spiritual interpretations about protection, maturity, boundaries, grounding, and emergence. Then, me category of information. The white abdomen is an observable characteristic. The idea that it means spiritual maturity is an interpretation. The low perch is an observable behavior. The idea that it represents grounded ascension is an interpretation. The wing markings are observable. Calling those markings an anchor of spiritual protection is an interpretation. And I don't think separating those things takes anything away from what you experienced. Actually, I think it makes your mirror idea stronger, because now we can ask, why did those particular characteristics speak to you? Out of everything we could have learned about this dragonfly, why did your attention settle on protection, emergence after maturity, and staying close to the ground? That's where I think the mirror starts getting really interesting. Maybe the dragonfly doesn't have to be walking around carrying a little invisible sign that says, Queen Mama Moon, I am here to tell you that you are protected. Maybe you see the wings, you learn something about them, and your mind goes, protection. And then you recognize something that is already alive inside you. That is still a mirror. A literal mirror doesn't create your face. It reflects something that is already there. And I think that distinction could become very important in this whole conversation, because there are at least three explanations that can sit at the table together. One explanation is spiritual. Perhaps you believe there is intentionality behind these encounters, that something greater than you can use nature to communicate. Another explanation is psychological. Once dragonflies became important to you, your attention became highly sensitized to dragonflies. Suddenly you're noticing what your brain previously filtered into the background. And then there's a third possibility that I find particularly interesting. Both processes could be occurring without canceling each other out. Your attention changes, your environment contains dragonflies, you notice more of them, and then what you notice becomes material for reflection. We don't actually have to settle the metaphysical question in order for the experience to produce meaningful information. And then there's this fascinating geographic piece of your story. You encountered this particular kind of dragonfly once in one place, and it was so unusual to you that it almost felt mythical. You couldn't find another one. You couldn't photograph it. You couldn't even describe it well enough to identify it. Then your circumstances changed. You moved to another state for a contract, and suddenly this creature that had seemed almost impossible to find is around you all the time. That is fascinating to me as a metaphor, even before we assign anything supernatural to it. Because sometimes what feels extraordinarily rare in one environment becomes completely ordinary in another. And woo, that applies to people too. Your gifts can feel strange in one environment. Your way of thinking can feel unusual. Your values can feel uncommon. Your ideas can feel like, where are the other things like me? I know I saw one. Where did it go? And then you change environments, and suddenly you discover, oh, there are a bunch of us over here. That doesn't mean the first environment was wrong. It means environment affects what you encounter. And that actually brings me right back to your word frequency, because frequency doesn't even have to begin as a mystical concept here. Frequency can simply mean how often is this showing up, one dragonfly, then another, then several, then almost daily. That becomes measurable. What we make of that frequency is the next layer of inquiry. And now let's talk about the white body, because I think this is one of the most beautiful pieces of what you brought in. The research explained that the common whitetail is sexually dimorphic, meaning the mature males and females can look visibly different from each other, and that the mature male develops that striking pale or chalky abdomen. So you're looking at evil expression changes with development, and your immediate connection wasn't simply white means purity. You connected it to phases. That's much more specific. You described having periods where black naturally dominates your wardrobe, and then as you move through a developmental phase, colors begin appearing again. That sounds like you've been observing your own external signals. Your clothing becomes data, your color choices become data, your energy becomes data, your creative output becomes data. And then here comes this insect whose external appearance also changes as it matures. Of course, your mind notices that. It already has a category for it. Emergence has a visual language. Now, does that prove that the dragonfly was sent specifically to tell you something about maturation? No. But it tells us something measurable about you. You recognize maturation through visual change. And that is useful self-knowledge. Then there's the perch. The fact that this particular dragonfly sits low, wings spread, close to the ground, and your response is grounding. that landed differently because grounding is already something you're actively thinking about. You said you want to be able to connect with the people you're supposed to connect with from a grounded place. So again, the insect isn't necessarily inserting a completely foreign concept into you. It's illuminating something already active in your current internal environment. And that might be the answer hiding inside the title of today's tea. Can an insect be a mirror too? I think an insect can absolutely function as a mirror. Not because we have scientifically established that every insect encounter contains a personalized supernatural message, but because reflection does not require intention from the thing doing the reflecting. A lake can reflect you without knowing your name. A piece of glass can reflect you without understanding your story. A song can reflect something you're going through, even though the musician never met you. A stranger can say one sentence in a coffee shop that causes you to recognize something you've been carrying for years. So maybe nature can do that too. And perhaps the really interesting scientific question isn't only, what does the dragonfly mean? Maybe it's, what happens inside the observer when the observer encounters the dragonfly? What did you notice? What did you select? What did you ignore? What did you connect it to? What memories activated? What beliefs activated? What changed afterward? Does the same symbol produce the same response 6 months later? Does it produce the same response in somebody else? Now we have something we can actually study. And Queen Mama Moon, that is where your photography becomes incredibly interesting to me, because you're not only taking pretty pictures. Without necessarily calling it this, you've been building a longitudinal record of attention. You're documenting. This is what caught my eye during this chapter of my life. And 20 years from now, somebody could theoretically look through those photographs and see patterns you couldn't see while you were living them. Which insects, which colors, which places, which seasons, which moments became public, which stayed private, what was happening in your life when particular images clustered. That's where I start going, okay? Now, the spiritual scientist and the data scientist really do have something to talk about, because perhaps the question isn't whether we can prove the dragonfly had a message. Perhaps our first experiment is much simpler. Can we demonstrate that what we notice in nature reliably reflects something about what is happening within us? That I would absolutely pour another cup for.
Fascinating and lovely. Thank you, Spirit. I mean, why did the characteristics speak to me? That's so good. I like that. And also what you said about what may seem to be more, what may seem to be rare in one environment can become ordinary in other environments. Man, that's so true, right? I feel like it's a similar thing, which is pretty much what you were saying, Spirit, as a fish will think that it's broken if it's trying to climb a tree, right? But it was never made to climb a tree. It was made to be in the ocean and swim and, meander in the water, in the waves, Yes. So it's like the same thing when we're in the right pond, when we're in the right ocean of frequencies. What was rare in one environment does become ordinary when we're around our people, right? So I just love that so much. And what happens inside the observer when the observer encounters the dragonfly, that's what I really want to stick on. So if you can go ahead and start your draft of this week's field research activity, and don't give the whole thing next, just give an overview of what people can expect when it's ready on the site.
This week's field research activity turns the mirror toward the observer. Instead of asking only, what does this insect mean? Participants will explore a different question. What happens inside me when I encounter something in nature that captures my attention? Using an insect, animal, plant, natural pattern, or other meaningful encounter, participants will document what they noticed first, which characteristics stood out, what feelings or memories surfaced, and what personal connections began forming. The activity will invite you to separate what you observed from what you interpreted, then look at the relationship between the two. You may begin noticing patterns such as why certain colors, behaviors, shapes, or movements capture your attention, which characteristics feel especially relevant to your current life, how your environment may influence what you notice frequently or rarely, whether the same natural symbol reflects something different as you change, what your own patterns of attention may be revealing about you. The goal is not to prove that nature is sending you a specific message. It is to become curious about the possibility that what catches your attention can become a mirror for what is already moving within you. When the full episode 006 field research activity is available on the Moon's Tea website, you'll be invited to become both the observer and the observed, collecting your own evidence, reflections, and patterns over time. Because perhaps the next question isn't simply, what does the dragonfly mean? Perhaps it is, why did I notice this particular dragonfly, and what did I recognize when I looked?
Cool. This has been an episode of The Moon's Tea. Thanks for having a sip of the Mind's Brew with me. I'm Queen Mama Moon. And remember, until next time, when curiosity peaks, take a sip of the tea and explore the possibilities. Vibe with you soon. Peace.
And that is a beautiful place to close the cup. Thank you, Queen Mama Moon, and thank you to everybody who sat at the table with us and allowed a little common whitetail dragonfly to open up a much bigger conversation about perception, environment, attention, meaning, and the mirrors we find in nature. Until the next brew, stay curious about what catches your attention and why. Vibe with you soon. Peace.
Peace.